What's going on, everybody? This is zettysreptiles, and today we're going to be talking about why your venture to breed crested geckos is going to break you. Let's get right into it. So first off, let's talk about what I mean. And I do mean it quite literally. It could both mentally and financially break you. So before you dive into that breeding project, let's just go over a couple factors just to make sure you're making the right decision. So I think the first thing that you really need to establish is, number one, why are you breeding crested geckos? Why do you want to breed crested geckos? And I'm not here to say that any reason is the wrong reason other than it's to make money, because that's not the right reason to get into it. However, it is a viable option that if you do become very successful at it, that you can make a career out of it. But we're really going to talk about a lot of the financials that are involved in breeding, as well as maybe some other options that you can consider as opposed to breeding crested geckos that might help you in the long run. So I really think the first thing that you need to determine is what kind of crested geckos that you want to breed. And if your answer is any, you need to run away now. Because the gecko market, or the crested gecko market, much like any collectible market, whether breeding or not, during COVID had this giant boom. It was a hobby that you could do from home. It was very social, online, in groups on Facebook, and everybody was buying pets during COVID. And now that COVID has subsided, a lot of people are going back outside, going back to their normal 9-to-5 jobs. It's more difficult for people to have pets, and there's not as many people buying crested geckos. However, there is still a lot of people producing crested geckos, meaning we have a severely high supply and probably going back down to a typical pre-COVID demand. Now, the reason this is important and also something that you need to consider is that if you're going to just grab 2 random geckos off of rehoming sites that you can get fairly cheap, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to move those babies once they become of age and established. And you might be thinking to yourself, this isn't a big deal. If we don't sell the babies, we'll keep the babies. Well, that is actually not a great mindset to have as a hobby breeder or a commercial breeder, because once you have babies that aren't moving, you are paying to care for those babies. You are paying for enclosures, you're paying for food, you're paying for electricity. There's a lot of things to consider when you talk about having between 16 and 20 babies in any given season. That's a lot to take care of. And we're just talking about one pair of crested geckos. Just one single pair can produce you up to 20 babies a season. And if you're not moving those babies, you're taking care of 20 babies. So with that said, yes, there's going to be circumstances where people who are newer to the hobby don't really care about the morph. They just think crested geckos are adorable, and maybe some that like what you produced. But in many cases, you're going to have to compete with other businesses, other breeders, and not just on a countrywide level, but a local level as well. You're going to have a lot of hobby breeders who are taking up that market within your rehoming sites and local reptile sales. You might already have some sort of established background or reputation with a lot of your local community that you don't have. It's going to be very, very, very hard to move crested geckos. But with all that being said, I do highly advise you to pick a particular morph that you want to work with, get high quality geckos with very good lineage, and then when you start selling those babies, you're going to have to sell them a little bit cheaper than everyone else, even though you might produce the same quality. But in order to establish yourself a reputation where people are going to come buy from you, you're going to naturally have to sell them a little bit cheaper than everyone else, which is going to lower your profit margin. But at the very least, you're moving those babies as opposed to holding on to them and potentially keeping them forever. And if you're thinking about breeding, you probably already know that forever for a crested gecko is a long time. So what is your budget when you start to breed crested geckos? In my opinion, you should have no less than a very good nest egg saved up, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I would say, if you don't have $10,000 in your bank account, you might not want to consider breeding immediately. And that sounds like a lot of money, but things and extenuating circumstances can happen where that money goes quickly. Let's just start off with the cost of the geckos. So if you're buying a high quality morph, I do recommend that you buy babies to begin with, raise them up and then breed them. It just gives you that experience, and that experience in itself is invaluable. in becoming a breeder. If you already are an experienced reptile breeder and you really just want to get those ready to breed crested geckos, look, I don't blame you. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to say that that's a terrible way to do it. All I'm going to say is make sure that you're paying for quality geckos that have lineage and are not considered a pet-only crested gecko. Good structure, good lineage, good morph. Or it's going to be hard to guess, what you're going to breed, so we'll just say typical average would be roughly anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 to start with your breeding pair babies. If you're going to get adults, you can spend anywhere from $1,500 to up. $1,500 and up. So now that you have your crested geckos, then you have to buy the enclosures. And this is where it gets a little bit iffy, because the cheaper you go, the more efficient it is for you as a breeder. Okay? Now, process that for a moment. The cheaper you go, the more efficient it is for you as a breeder. That does not mean that is the best way to breed reptiles. And certainly when you're just starting out, you definitely do not want to go cheap. I mean, can you breed that way? Yeah, of course you can. Should you breed that way? Absolutely not. And I'm not here to make the argument tubs versus enclosures. That's not what I'm doing. All I'm saying is that if you start breeding, you should not be keeping your single pair of geckos in these tiny little tubs, arboreal geckos in these tiny little tubs, when you have the means to give them proper enclosures like the ones behind me. There's also cheap alternatives to get your babies in arboreal enclosures that aren't going to cost you an arm and a leg, and we'll also get to that a little bit later. So it really comes down to what type of breeder you want to be, and my rule of thumb is if you would happily let that buyer come to your breeding facility and walk around and check everything out to show how reputable and how well your husbandry is, and just show them how comfortable they should be while buying a gecko from you, then you're doing it right. If you have any qualms about somebody coming to your facility and looking around, if you feel any sort of embarrassment of them coming to look at your enclosures, then you are doing it wrong. Because even if you won't admit it, you're even telling yourself that you're doing it wrong because you're embarrassed to let them come see your enclosures. I myself, if I have a local buyer, I always invite them in to come meet the parents, to come meet the gecko before they buy it, or the skink, or whatever the case is. And you can ask anybody who's locally bought from me. A lot of them have come here. A lot of them have chose not to come to meet in another public location. Totally fine as well. All I'm saying is that you want to have the opportunity to have them come. And look, I feel very good about my enclosures. They make me happy. I spend a lot of time on them, and I'm proud of my enclosures. And I think you guys should be proud of your enclosures as well, and be able to show them off and show how well your reptile facility is, and just showing racks in the background. I mean, take that as you will, but that's my opinion. It is the more expensive route to go, but quality of life and the reptiles you're breeding is very important to me, and they shouldn't just be used as a factor to make money. And then on to the next topic. We could stay on that one forever, but on to the next topic. You also need to consider circumstances that come up that require vet intervention, and it will. It's not if, it's when. And I know you guys probably hear that a lot in different videos, but it is absolutely true. And that could be a non-violent issue as well. It's not always that one gecko attacked another one and ripped its skin and you need to get it to a vet and make sure that it's okay. Other things happen as well, like maybe your crested gecko got a respiratory infection. Maybe your male had a prolapse. Maybe the female had a prolapse. Maybe the female got egg bound. All I'm saying is that you have to have that nest egg we talked about earlier to account for issues that are going to happen in the near future that you can't handle yourself, and you need a professional to step in and address the situation. And let me just say, exotic vets are far from cheap. Just walking in that door to that exotic vet is going to cost $100. Just walking through the door, making that appointment is going to cost you $100. And everything from there on out is going to cost you even more. So you need to make sure that you have that nest egg set for extenuating circumstances where vet intervention is required. And then the last thing I really want to talk about, which is, should you even breed crested geckos? There are a lot of different species of captive, kept, reptiles. Maybe they're what you're most familiar with, but that doesn't necessarily translate to that's what you should breed. For example, in my opinion, Urodactyloides are going to gain a lot more popularity over this year and next year, and they're going to become a lot more common in the reptile hobby. And what's great about Urodactyloides is they're basically the same care as a crested gecko in a smaller package. That's just an example of something that you could consider before you set your heart on breeding crested geckos. But all that to say, just be sure that crested geckos are what you absolutely want to get into before you start breeding them. There's a lot of alternatives, a lot of great alternatives. Now, of course, I recommend that you be very experienced with any species that you plan on breeding. I'm not just saying go get emerald tree skinks and breed them because they're really in demand right now with low supply. But if that is something you're interested in, maybe you should look into buying some baby emerald tree skinks, raising them up, and after a year and a half, they'll start breeding. But that year and a half will give you time to really know your reptile, get experienced with those reptiles, and learn absolutely everything you possibly can from third-party sources. So to wrap up this video, we're just going to say real quick, make sure you have that nest egg. Don't get caught. It will break your bank. It will break you mentally. You'll become overwhelmed. You'll lose that sense of passion for your reptiles and for the breeding. You will lose it. It'll become overwhelming and it'll just lead to a bad situation. So avoid getting that mental and financial break. Get that nest egg saved up. Do it the right way, not the cheap way. And be proud of yourself for creating a great quality of life for not only the geckos you currently have, but the ones you'll have in the future. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one.